Ottawa Prime Minister Justin Trudeau offered a broad and emotional apology on Friday to Indigenous people in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, where for much of the 20th century Indigenous children were compelled to attend boarding schools that separated them from their families and cultures and, in many cases, subjected them to abuse. In addition to the apology, the Canadian government settled a class action lawsuit and will provide about 50 million Canadian dollars to about 900 former students of the 5 schools, which endured until 1980. The decision came after a decade-long controversy over the federal government's responsibility. In 2008, Mr. Trudeau's predecessor, Stephen Harper, apologized to Indigenous people in the rest of Canada for a residential school program the federal government operated from the 19th century until 1996. A National Truth and Reconciliation Commission later condemned that system as a form of cultural genocide. Because Newfoundland and Labrador did not join Canada until 1949, its boarding school system had different origins even if it had a similar legacy. Mr. Harper's government took the view that the abuses committed there in the early 20th century were not the federal government's fault. But in a ceremony in Happy Valley Goose Bay, Newfoundland, at which victims also spoke, Mr. Trudeau said, "It's time for Canada to acknowledge its history for what it is, flawed, imperfect and unfinished. For far too many students, profound cultural loss led to poverty, family violence, substance abuse and community breakdown." Mr. Trudeau said it led to mental and physical health issues that have impeded their happiness and that of their family. Far too many continue to face adversity today as a result of time spent in residential schools, and for that we are sorry. At the Arts Centre where Mr. Trudeau spoke, organizers had stacked boxes of facial tissues. They were put to use. Mr. Trudeau blotted his eyes and dabbed his nose with a handkerchief, and former students and others in the crowd sobbed. Toby Obed, 45, a former student and one of the leaders of the class action lawsuit, entered the stage after Mr. Trudeau in a jubilant mood, arms raised and shouting, "We did it." But Mr. Obed was overcome by emotion as well. "We felt left out, forgotten and abandoned," said Mr. Obed, who had testified about being a victim of sexual assault. "Because I come from a patient and forgiving culture, I think it is proper for us to accept an apology from the Government of Canada. Not everyone in the region's Indigenous community was so forgiving." Grand Chief Greg Ridge of the Innu Nation, an umbrella organization of Indigenous groups, said in a statement that he wanted the apology to also recognize injustices suffered by Aboriginal children in day schools, at an orphanage and in the child welfare system. "Our elders are not ready to accept an apology that is made for such a small part of our experience," Mr. Ridge said in his statement. But Todd Russell, the president of Nunatukavut, an organization of Southern Inuit in Labrador, said he believed that the vast majority of former students welcomed the news. "The apology was delivered in absolute sincerity and humility," Mr.